Was Russia's 2025 summer offensive a success? This is what we're going to explore in this video. I mean, we could just look at the map, right? That was a frontline situation on May 20th, and this is the situation 4 months later at the end of September.
That's it?
Yes, but it's a bit more complex than that. Some will go as far as to say Ukraine is winning. The president of Finland went as far as to declare,
Ukraine is in a better place than they were a year ago. And there are reasons for that. Their military capacity has strengthened.
Not really, bro. Not by any metrics. At the same time, if Finland calls this deal a win, then yeah, Ukraine is in a better position than last year. So on one hand, we have Russia that claims that its summer campaign was a big success. I mean, they have made undeniable territorial gains between May and September, and Russian forces are carrying offensive actions across the entire front. On the 7th of October, Putin even declared that the armed forces of the Russian Federation liberated 219 settlements this year. Sounds impressive, but we're actually talking about a majority of hamlets and small villages. That's exactly why pro-Ukrainian sources also frame this as a Russian failure. And to be honest, despite all its problems, our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia didn't collapse. And they still hold on to the biggest urban areas along the front line, like Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka and Kupyansk. So when I asked, can Ukraine survive Russia's summer offensive? The answer is yes. However, there's a big but waiting for you at the end of the video because it's also not sunshine and rainbows. So in this video, we'll take a deep dive into this summer campaign, examining maps, casualty figures, and of course, the broader picture of this fourth summer of the Russia-Ukraine war. As the spooky season arrives, I discovered what's really keeping Russian and Ukrainian commanders up at night this year. No, it's not Pokrovsk or Kupyansk, it's Outscale. The world's first AI-focused education platform is hosting a 2-day AI Mastermind workshop, which is happening this Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time on both days. Over 10 million people across the globe have attended this training, and they have boosted their career growth and made businesses with zero code that makes revenue models worth $4,000 to $5,000. This training, which is rated 4.9 out of 5 on Trustpilot, and that usually costs $395, is completely free for my audience because I've partnered with Outskill to give away 1,000 free seats for the next 48 hours as part of the Halloween sale. But here's why I urge you to join it. Firstly, this isn't theory. It's fully hands-on AI training from practitioners at Microsoft and Nvidia, people who've actually built and shaped the industry. Secondly, in just 2 days, you'll learn over 10 AI-powered tools, AI in Excel sheets and presentations, building AI agents, automating your workflow, and much more. Also, you get access to the learning dashboard, where you're introduced to like-minded people to build with them and enhance your overall learning process. That's not all. You'll also walk away with bonuses valued at $5,000, including a prompt Bible, a roadmap to monetize AI, and a personalized AI toolkit builder, but only if you attend both days. I will be attending this, and so should you. Limited seats are available. Grab yours now via the link in the description below. It feels good to be back in the headquarters. As always, let's start with the map. This was the front line in eastern Ukraine on the 20th of May 2025, and this was the situation 4 months later by the 20th of September. At first glance, it's not very impressive. Months of fighting only to nibble the front line. Now what I find funny is how pro-Ukrainian news outlets will show you the entire map of Ukraine to further minimize the scale of Russian gains.
In the past roughly 1,000 days, Russia has advanced only 1 percentage point of Ukrainian territory.
I mean, I don't know, it's so ridiculous. But imagine doing this for a World War I or World War II map without actually zooming in on the area of operations. Oh my god, thank you, I understand the battle much better now. The big picture is that nowhere did the Russians lose ground. Only forward, vперед! We can also see how the Russian armed forces are making gains along the entire front. From the north in the Kupyansk direction to Liman, Pokrovsk, and in the south Donetsk direction. Russia is actively advancing along a 300-kilometer front. And this is the biggest difference with 2024, with the Russian High Command concentrated all its efforts along the axis Avdiivka-Pokrovsk. Now, if you remember, in the summer of 2024, there were many cracks in the Ukrainian front line due to a lack of troops. And this became even worse when, in August 2024, the AFU launched an offensive against Kursk with its remaining mobile reserves. The purpose of this invasion of Russia was actually to divert Russian reserves away from the Pokrovsk direction. Let's just say the plan ended up backfiring hard for Ukraine, a bit like the Italian invasion of Greece. This year, however, in 2025, Russian gains can be explained by Ukraine's insufficient number of riflemen, even for static defense. The Ukrainian army simply doesn't have enough riflemen to hold all these fancy fortifications and trench lines they've built. In turn, they mostly rely on drones to secure the contact line. Still, if we go back to the 2025 map, we can hardly call the summer campaign decisive. You might ask yourself, how much ground did the Russians actually gain? Well, we have to look at this chart. We can see Russia's territorial gains in Ukraine from January 2024 up until September 2025. During the summer 2025 campaign, between May and September, the Russian army gained a total of 2,300 square kilometers. In comparison, the Russian armed forces gained 1,380 square kilometers in the summer of 2024, essentially a 60% increase of territory gained during the summer of 2025. Yeah, that definitely puts Ukraine in a better position. Now, of course, the mainstream media fears such factual data. Anyway, in these articles, it's always the same thing. Yes, the Russians might be advancing, but they achieved this at the cost of massive casualties. If only they saw how British soldiers are trained to assault enemy positions.
All hope is failing, my lord!
But is that factual? Is this true? I'm working on a big project these days. No spoilers, and I think I can tweak the results even some more. But what I can tell you for now is that between May 20th and the 30th of September, Ukraine suffered about 17,000 fatalities, while Russia lost 15,500 KIA, nearly a 1-to-1 ratio, 1.1 to be precise. Such data will make the hooligans of both sides very angry. But that's the reality, or at least as close as we can get to reality. All I can say is that we're looking at a pure war of attrition. What's fascinating is how, despite Ukraine's fortifications, despite Russian storm detachments being constantly on the attack, despite the thousands of Ukrainian FPV drones flying over the battlefield, despite Russia's massive firepower advantage, we're still at a 1-to-1 ratio. Isn't that crazy? And that's not all. What I thought was actually surprising is how between the same period, but in 2024, so last year, Ukraine lost 21,000 soldiers KIA or missing, and Russia 14,000, a 1.5 ratio in favor of Russia. The spike in Ukrainian casualties of the summer of 2024 clearly reflects the toll of Ukraine's Kursk operation. But still, when The Economist says Russia's 2025 summer Ukraine offensive looks like its deadliest yet, surprisingly, it's true. I call it Operation Mincemeat because, unfortunately, all the data they use to support their argument is completely wrong and made up. The only thing we can confirm as of now is that the Russian army suffered an extra 10% fatalities compared to last summer. That's the first layer. But there comes a second one. Check this out. Overall, in the summer of 2024, the price for Russia for every square kilometer gained was about 10 fatalities. Meanwhile, during the summer of 2025, it dropped to 5 KIA per square kilometer, 2 times less. That's some groundbreaking information. How come nobody's talking about this? So while total losses for the Russians increased by 10%, the price of a mile actually decreased by 50%. So maybe the Russian military is doing something right. Now let's assess the summer campaign in terms of the losses of military equipment. According to the website Warspotting, between the 20th of May and the 20th of September, geolocated Russian material losses amounted to 703 vehicles or pieces of military equipment, of which 105 tanks, 210 infantry fighting vehicles, 175 trucks, 28 self-propelled howitzers, and 42 towed artillery pieces. Sadly, it doesn't take into account motorbikes or buggies. There's certainly hundreds of these light assets that were destroyed during the summer, but they're also easily replaceable, I guess. Meanwhile, according to Lost Armor, during the same period, the Ukrainians lost 463 vehicles and pieces of military equipment, all of them visually confirmed, separated as follows: 107 tanks, 203 armored troop transports, and 120 self-propelled howitzers. Every time it's a terrifying 1-to-1 ratio, except for self-propelled howitzers, where Ukraine lost a staggering 4 units for every Russian loss. The conclusion is clear. Once again, we're witnessing a war of attrition. But once again, this is incomplete, because the team of Lost Armor didn't count towed artillery pieces, or once again, the hundreds of light assets like pickup trucks that were destroyed or damaged. So roughly speaking, in terms of material losses, we stand at a ratio of 1.5 to 1 in favor of Ukraine. It could be shocking for some people, especially with all these pro-Ukrainian accounts spamming footage from drone strikes day and night. Watching them, we would think Russian losses in vehicles would be much higher. And since Russia is gaining ground, its forces can retrieve the lost vehicles, repair them, and send them back to the front. So that was a quick summary of the macro situation of the summer campaign. How about we go a bit more in detail and look at specific fronts? Earlier I showed you an overall map of Russia's gains in the summer, but we can clearly see that the bulk of the fighting took place in Donetsk Oblast. As a reminder, this is Russia's main political objective. Russia needs to conquer all of Donetsk Oblast in order to be able to call for victory. So it makes sense for them to concentrate their efforts in this direction. If we zoom in some more to the northern part of Donetsk Oblast, this was the situation on the 20th of May, and this was the front line at the end of the summer. The Russian High Command massed about 10 combined arms armies along a 250-kilometer front. It's absolutely huge. In the north of Donetsk Oblast, the Russian 20th and 25th Combined Arms armies are coming all over Liman from all directions. It's a big mess. We can expect a big battle very soon. But I won't cover this right now because I've already done a video about it recently. If you're interested, the link will be in the description below. And it's also because I wanted to focus on what's happening on the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka front. This was a situation between these two very strategic cities on the 20th of May. The Russian 20th Division had achieved a significant success by enlarging this bulge and swarming the TO-504 road linking Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka. Russian forces kept making gains, and then, all of a sudden, on the 9th of August, Russian patrols were spotted 20 kilometers beyond the contact line.
What are you doing here?
This was one of the most important events of the summer in Ukraine. Had this Russian breakthrough been successful, the entire Ukrainian front could have simply collapsed. Due to the critical situation, the Ukrainian command urgently dispatched elite assault units to counterattack and stabilize the situation. For example, here you can see men of the 79th Air Assault Brigade in Zoloty Kolodiaz that they just liberated. So in the end, these assault detachments sent forward by the general staff of the AFU managed to stabilize the situation and put down this raging bulge, at least for some time. Because today the overall picture in this sector remains extremely confusing. Pro-Ukrainian deep state UAMAP simply decided to, I don't know how to say it, to not update the map anymore. Nobody knows for sure what's actually going on. Pro-Ukrainian sources keep talking of encircled Russian detachments, how the salient has been crushed, while pro-Russian sources claim the Ukrainian counteroffensive failed. It's really like Schrödinger's cat. According to most neutral mappers, the Russians sent reinforcements to the sector northeast of Pokrovsk and managed to strengthen their positions inside the salient. And although the Russians were not able to push further, it's the girth of this bulge that is now expanding. And heavy fighting is taking place along the Shakhove-Sofivka axis along the Kazini-Torets River. Is it a coincidence though? Should we act surprised? Remember what I told you in mid-July. And if the Russian command is diabolical, they will leave Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka behind and push northwards along the Kazini-Torets River. By controlling these four villages, Sofivka, Shakhove, Volodymyrivka and Malak, They can do whatever they want in the northern part of Donetsk Oblast. I repeat, whoever controls this area controls the key to both the battles of Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. Okay, but overall, by mid-October, Pokrovsk is still in Ukrainian hands. And that's not all. Mirnorhad is also still in Ukrainian hands. Rodinsk is still in Ukrainian hands. And this despite 1 year of combat operations in this direction. However, that doesn't mean the situation is not critical. According to the latest news, Russian assault squads are grinding their way forward, block by block, towards the city center of Pokrovsk. But the majority of the urban area is still under Ukrainian control. Meanwhile, on the eastern flank, Kostiantynivka still holds as well. There in the sector, the Ukrainians formed a 10-kilometer buffer zone in some sort of semicircle around Kostiantynivka, and as of now, it seems to hold up. And the Ukrainians benefit from a central position, Napoleon's favorite, from where they can easily strike and counterattack Russian moves around this semicircle. If we zoom out during the summer 2025 campaign, the objective of the AFU in Donetsk Oblast was to maintain control over these two urban areas, an objective they successfully achieved. The goal was to use Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka as bulwarks and keep Russian forces as far as possible from the crown jewels of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. As of now, we can definitely speak of a defensive victory for Ukraine. However, this came at a cost. Due to manpower shortages, the Ukrainian army cannot effectively defend everything along the contact line. Some areas had to be abandoned, especially the positions laying in open terrain. So while the Russian offensive against Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka more or less got bogged down, the Russian 5th, 8th, 36th, and 41st Combined Arms Armies had a field day as they launched a sweeping movement in this huge empty space in the South Donetsk direction. The combined action of these four armies, totaling an estimated 100,000 men, enabled Russian forces to advance 20 to 25 kilometers, not only securing the entire southern part of Donetsk Oblast, but now shoving their tip into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. You see the Russian officers standing in the headquarters of the High Command are not maneuvering companies and battalions on a fancy digital dashboard, but they're pushing entire armies on the map at once. At this moment, not a single military in the world has this ability. NATO forgot how to do this a long time ago. To understand what the Russian High Command is doing, we have to go back to the World War II Soviet concept of operative art, something French historians Jean Lopez and Benoît Billon explored in depth, rather than Clausewitz's doctrine of the decisive battle. Soviet military strategists planned a sequence of operations that ultimately would lead towards a set political objective. Leveraging this approach, the Russian command in Ukraine is then able to launch simultaneous multi-axis offensives involving multiple armies. Little note, what the Russian call Combined Arms Armies would be equivalent to a NATO corps. But look, it's still impressive. The best example of this multi-axis offensive doctrine is how the Russians suddenly opened the northern front of Ukraine. So apart from the main effort in Donetsk Oblast, the Russian command also intensified supporting actions against Kharkiv and Sumy oblasts. This was the frontline situation on the northern border on the 20th of May, and this is how the situation evolved by the end of September. As you can see, Russia is increasing its pressure along the entire border. This brings a dual objective: militarily compel the AFU to thin its dispositions and spread its forces, and politically open the road towards a possible annexation of Kharkiv Oblast. The major event of this summer campaign took place along the Oskol River, north of Kupyansk. There, the 6th Combined Arms Army greatly expanded its bridgehead across the river. From these newly gained positions, it was able to outflank the Ukrainians and secure a foothold inside Kupyansk. As of now, the entire northern part of the city is under Russian control. If you're interested, I made an entire video about the Battle of Kupyansk. Once again, the link will be in the description below. Simultaneously, the Russians also launched offensive actions across the internationally recognized Russia-Ukraine border east of Veliki Borluk. So you see, the Russians are doing it on purpose to threaten multiple objectives at the same time. And this provides them with great operational flexibility. For the west in Vovchansk, barely any territorial changes to be reported. As you can see here, Vovchansk sadly got the Khan Yunis treatment.
Hey yo, what the
Whoops! Too soon. With that being said, on the 11th of October, According to Suryak maps, the Russians did make significant progress in the northern part of Vovchansk. Okay, we're talking about a 500-meter push, but it's a lot for Vovchansk, considering nothing moved there for a year. So slowly the Russian command is reactivating all these breachheads, like you do with pass hookups after you get dumped. 150 kilometers to the northwest, after retaking Kursk Oblast in March, the Russians also launched a major counteroffensive against Sumy Oblast at the beginning of the summer. This was the situation on the 20th of May, and this was the front line 1 month later by June 20th. The situation was critical. The Russians were approaching the city of Sumy, but that's when Ukrainian forces executed a timely counterattack against the settlements of Andrivka and Kindrativka, thus stabilizing their left flank and preventing an enemy breakthrough. This action effectively halted Russian advance for several weeks. Now, pro-Ukrainian reports were jubilating. They were claiming Russia's Sumy offensive had failed and that they would just pull back into Kursk Oblast. But that wasn't the case. Although multiple Russian brigades that were deployed in Sumy were transferred to Pokrovsk to bolster that salient that we talked about earlier, namely Russia's Marine Corps, that doesn't mean that Russia abandoned its breachhead in Sumy Oblast. By the end of September, we can notice how the Russians took control of Yunakivka. They've been fighting for this village since the 9th of June, 3 months. But now this Ukrainian bastion along the HO7 highway has finally fallen. It's clear that this is yet another secondary front for Russia, meant to further overstretch Ukrainian reserves. As you can see, although Russia clearly has the initiative, by the end of summer, Ukraine still maintained control of their 3 key objectives: Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka, and Kupyansk. However, the situation remains critical. Pokrovsk is 3/4 encircled, Kostiantynivka sits in a cauldron, and the northern half of Kupyansk has already fallen. During this summer campaign, Russian generals moved their pawns, and although they couldn't raise big flags, they shaped the battlefield for the next season. As a reminder, Russian forces have this Slavic urge to fight in the snow. They like to storm urban areas in the winter, like what we've witnessed in Bakhmut and Avdiivka. So let's see what surprises the winter of 2025-2026 will bring. From Ukraine's perspective, another important point is how for the first time since 2022, the AFU has not launched a summer offensive. As a reminder, in 2022 they attacked in Kherson and Kharkiv, in 2023 in Zaporozhye against the Surovikin line, in 2024 they invaded Kursk Oblast, but this year they didn't launch any offensive. Finally, the commanders of the General Staff of Ukraine have learned from their past mistakes. No more wasting precious manpower for PR stunts. But that also doesn't mean the AFU remained passive. Commander-in-Chief Syrsky even said it himself. Their defense is proactive. The goal is to disrupt all enemy advance plans. Essentially, instead of a big counteroffensive, Ukrainian forces carry out a multitude of local counterattacks with specialized assault units. These lightning counterattacks were also the strength of the German army during World War II, and it was a nightmare for the Allies. The reason why is simple. The goal for the AFU this year is to rebuild its combat potential. Since voluntary enlistments are low, Ukraine relies on partial mobilization to fill in the ranks. With an estimated 30,000 conscripts aged between 25 and 60 called under the flag every month. In theory, that's 360,000 replacements during a 12-month period. In theory, more than enough to fill all frontline units to max capacity. However, this intense bussification of civilians from the lower classes into the armed forces naturally led to high desertion rates. Unlike Ukrainian tech bros that can pay their way out of conscription, poor factory workers have no other choice but to be forcefully dragged into a bang bus. According to this post, between May and September, 90,000 cases of desertion were reported in the AFU. We've reached the point where in the Ukrainian army, AWOL losses exceed the combat casualties. We can see this phenomenon starting with this sharp increase in fall 2024, which, surprise surprise, is also a month where the Russians have made massive gains. Civilians that were too poor to avoid being conscripted, that are then sent to the front with barely any training to counterattack and recuperate pointless positions. And then the general staff wonders why desertions are at an all-time high.
Madness. madness and stupidity.
This factor alone could explain why Ukraine has not launched an offensive this summer. It simply doesn't have the means to do so.
There's nobody left for you to fight.
Ukrainian journalist Volodymyr Boyko claims that in reality there are only 30 to 50,000 military servicemen on the line of contact with the Ukrainian side. He's talking about the effective number of riflemen in the AFU. What a disaster! So, since Ukraine cannot win on the battlefield, now we understand why it's expanding its drone and missile campaign against Russian infrastructure. It's an indirect approach. The goal is to disrupt Russian logistics and bring down its economy to zero. And according to multiple reports, there's indeed a fuel crisis starting in Russia. But it's yet to be determined if this will have an impact on the battlefield. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of this analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.